Great. Good morning, everyone. And happy February. Happy Super Bowl day. There's so much going on in February. Actually, the season for nonviolence started in January 29th, as it does every year. And then, of course, we have Valentine's Day this week. So lots of things going on. And I don't want to forget, Black History Month. The book of the month for this topic that we're talking about is Howard Thurman's The Inward Journey. And it is a beautiful book about really centering ourselves in that inner process. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Howard Thurman a little further on in my talk. But I do want to welcome you to the Center for Spiritual Living, Capistrano Valley. And this is a community where we really explore what it means to be living from our spiritual center, living spiritually in the world. Our annual theme is open at the top. And that phrase was actually coined by one of Ernest Holmes' biographers, Neil Tull, and he wrote a book called Open at the Top that really talks about the life and times of Ernest Holmes, who's the founder of our philosophy. And I think, I couldn't find if Ernest Holmes actually said open at the top. But I think when we look at this philosophy and we look at the way it was presented by Ernest Holmes, he really wanted us to practice something that was living and breathing and had a life of its own and would evolve over time. He didn't want us to get stuck in doctrine, though I think after 100 years we have, sort of. We've kind of got caught in our own little doctrine. I admit it. I think you have to name something if you want it to change. But it is a beautiful sentiment, and it's a great reminder all year as we look at this topic of being open at the top and knowing that life is constantly evolving and changing. And so for February, the topic is embracing the edge. Embracing the edge. And we're looking at this topic internally, personally, communally. Last week we talked a little bit about how we oftentimes see the world only through our own perspective, and that can be very colored. I use that silly metaphor about driving in the fog, and you're trying really hard to see, and you realize that everything becomes clear once you reach over and turn on the defroster. And then you're no longer trying to manage the weather. You're managing your own seeing. And it's up to us to keep our seeing clear. And I think when we talk about this idea of embracing the edge, that it is a perfect topic for where we are right now. It seems tailor-made. Because I know many of us are feeling stretched. And being an edge walker, walking on the edge can feel really scary. I'm reminded of this story when I was visiting Sedona with my mother and one of our friends from the Spiritual Living Center that I went to in Baltimore, and we were on a road trip in Sedona, and we were driving up to this vortex called Merry-Go-Round Mountain. And we're driving up, and you can't drive in a regular car. You have to have a four-wheel drive. And we're driving along, and suddenly my mother and Peg, who are, at an older age than the rest of us, are kind of looking over the edge. It's like, oh, we're really close to the edge, aren't we? And the car is bobbing and weaving and bouncing over rocks. It was worth the drive, but it was a little scary being so close to the edge. And I think that's kind of how we can feel sometimes when we're edge walking, when we're beginning to get close to that edge of leaving the comfort zone and maybe growing, leaving behind some of the things that we have felt safe and comforted by, and it's time to step into a greater unknown. And so with our world in the current turmoil that it's in, It's not the first time we've been here, right? It's not the first time we've been here. Certainly, it's been, and as I demonstrate, as I share with you some of the things I want to say, you'll see my point. We're really exploring what it is that keeps us feeling safe as we walk that edge. What it is that allows us to press in and lean in as edge walkers. Because this idea of spiritual living, it doesn't just happen in theory. I think it was Holmes who said too much theory and not enough practice is one of our danger places. If we're just talking about pretty words and fancy ideas, then this teaching has no value, really. It makes us feel good for about an hour and a half when we're in community together. But this philosophy that we are practicing together is actually an opportunity for us to really begin to live in the world as spiritual livers, in real relationships, in good times and in bad, in calm times and in times where we feel really under pressure. And there is an unspoken pressure that many of us might be feeling in the world right now because there's things that are going on that are quite disturbing. And as I said last week, my personal experience is if I'm not paying attention to, let me just back up a minute. Personal evolution requires some friction. It requires a little tension. And so I find if I'm not getting that tension from the world events, if I'm not feeling that little bit of friction that I need to grow to the next level, well, gosh darn it, it'll show up in my life in personal places. Because spirit only knows how to express itself and evolve and continue to grow and move forward. And so it is always moving us forward one way or another. And I get annoyed by that sometimes. So wherever the noise is coming from for you, whether it's coming from the world or whether it's coming from your personal experience, the question that we really need to ask that's below the noise is, how do we live our truth without protecting and armoring up? Anybody do that? Is it just me? Do you find yourself protecting your heart? Do you find yourself maybe in certain circumstances just refusing to be affected, finding something to distract yourself with so that you don't have to feel the feels that are wanting to come up? Yeah, that's kind of my jam as well. And what I find is that when we do that, when I do that, when we overprotect ourselves, overprotect our heart, it just keeps us small and stuck. And in actuality, it mirrors what the world is doing. It mirrors the world's need to protect and armor up so that it doesn't feel and grow and experience what it is that what it needs to experience. My theory, as I said last week, is that we are in a time of high evolution and that the livingness of life can no longer be contained in the current structures humanity has built for it. And so we're feeling the tension and we're feeling the friction, whether we're feeling it in the world or whether we're feeling it at home. And so this is why this edge, embracing the edge, is so powerful for us this month, because last week we talked about embracing our inner edge, and now I want to talk about embracing the outer edge a little bit. That being conscious and aware of what's going on within ourselves is just as important as being conscious and aware of the environment that is affecting us. I'll say it this way, seemingly externally. And those that are chuckling get it, because it's all one. It's just a different purview. It's just a different way of seeing life. Sometimes we see it from our own lens. Sometimes we see it from the lens of the world. The most important thing is that we have to see it clearly. And when chaos arises around us and we begin to experience it, well, what happens for me, and I think it happens for other people, is we clench. Anybody clench? You know what I'm talking about? You can clench your fist, you can clench other parts of your body. We clench, we get tight. And when clenching shows up for us, oftentimes we have these knee-jerk reactions where we want to blame it on something outside of ourselves, or we're judging things that are around us, or we're grasping for certainty because we're right. Right? Am I right? My friend David likes to say, people are always certain, but often wrong. And we do these things, we react to these times that feel chaotic, not because we're not spiritual enough, but because we're human. We're human beings, right? We're living in the world, and we're living in a world that is inviting us to be afraid a lot of the time. The things that I read in the news, the conversations that I have, I can see the seeds of fear being planted, but we're not here to propagate fear in the world. We're here to propagate peace. We're here to propagate presence. Presence, and that's really what I want to talk about today with this principles and practices of this philosophy of science of mind. There is this deeper truth that we need to remember, and that is that reaction is not what is generating transformation. It is not reactions, it is our presence that generates transformation, because our reactions are the places where we are reacting to secondary cause. We're reacting to conditions as opposed to consciousness. And so this is where the voice of Howard Thurman speaks with stunning clarity. And if you don't know anything about Howard, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this man. He was a spiritual elder who lived through immense upheaval, through racial violence, economic collapse of the Depression, global war, and deep social divide. His lifelong question was not how to fight oppression as an African-American theologian in the 30s, but his lifelong question was how to remain spiritually alive when there is so much pressure to live in fear. And in the mid-1930s, Thurman traveled to India as part of a historic African-American delegation, and while he was there, he met Mahatma Gandhi. And Gandhi asked him a question that would shape everything for him. His question, which I believe Gandhi was asking himself in the times that he was living in India, how can the message of nonviolence be made real to the disinherited? How can the message of nonviolence be made real to the disinherited? And the disinherited are simply those people who were on the short end of the stick of whatever power structure that they were dealing with. And of course, in India, they were dealing with the external oppression of the British Empire and the internal oppression of the caste system. And so Thurman took that question to heart, and he brought it back with him to the United States, to the things that were happening in the U.S. at the time. And what I can tell you is that it shaped his ministry. It shaped his message. He began to really look at a spiritual solution to these human problems that we tend to propagate. And he has an amazing body of work, many, many books that I highly recommend. And what I know about Thurman is that he did not go to India looking for some political strategy. He wasn't going there to come up with some kind of tactic. The real thing that he was going for was some spiritual truth that could give fire to his ideas and passion to what he really believed in, which was that spirituality was the prevailing need for humanity to really live a life that is full and steeped in consciousness. And of course, Thurman is doing this work. Holmes is doing his own work around the same time. And what I can tell you is that all the work that is so famously attributed to Martin Luther King was very influenced by Howard Thurman. And Howard Thurman was very influenced by Gandhi. And so we have this kind of chain of mystics behind this great body of work of really looking at how to step into transformation and needed change from a place of presence, where nonviolence was the term that they were using as they were trying to affect change. And one of my favorite quotes from Thurman is, "Do not ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." What the world needs is people who have come alive. Do you feel very alive when you're fighting against something? Does that make you feel expansive and inspired? No, because and even when we are fighting against something and it really seems active and alive, underneath it is what you're for. Underneath it is what you're really trying to achieve. And so Thurman is not saying we ignore the world, and I love this. He's saying, do not outsource your values to it. How many times have I outsourced my own values and not realized it because I was unconscious at the moment? And when we do that, we lose our inner aliveness. And when we do that, we are not about healing the world. Instead, we are mirroring its confusion. And Gandhi and Thurman and King were all spiritual giants and mystics in their own way. And they give context to what I'm calling the tale of two mystics. Two spiritual guides, intrinsic to our philosophy, that were edge walkers. And they were walking the edge of life. And the first is Jesus of Nazareth, and not the westernized Jesus that is in the popular zeitgeist. No, I'm talking about the Jesus that lived the doctrine of love. That was his message. And he lived in a time of occupation and political violence and religious polarization and social division, and yet he consistently refused to let fear dictate his presence. He did not withdraw. He did not try to dominate or armor up. Instead, he was available. And he stayed relational. He walked the streets. He would meet people where they're at, in the villages, at the well, on the roads. And he didn't go in with this idea that he was going to tell people what's right and wrong. No, he went into conversations not with a hardened heart, but with an open heart, and led and buoyed up and inspired by his idea of oneness and of love. Jesus did not offer certainty. He offered presence. The second mystic is Ernest Holmes. And Ernest Holmes lived through world wars and economic collapse. And you seen a pattern here? And massive cultural upheaval. And what he taught was unwavering as well. The law responds to consciousness, not conditions. The law responds to consciousness, not conditions. And the law that I'm talking about is, to put simply and in a really plain English, is the law of cause and effect. Holmes reminded us that whatever state of mind we're living from, fear or faith, reaction or clarity, that's what gets multiplied. That's what we're putting out there. And Jesus demonstrated the essence of spiritual living, and Holmes explained how living a spiritual life works. And so we have these two mystics that work together, if you will, millennia apart. Of course, Holmes was building on a lot of the spiritual essence that he gleaned from all his writing and all his reading and all his studying. He studied the Vedics. He studied the teaching of Jesus. He studied Eastern religion. He studied Western religion. And he brought it all together to help us know how this idea of living spiritually works. And Jesus told us the essence of living spiritually. Different perspectives, same truth. Jesus trusted presence, Holmes trusted principle, and just for good measure, we'll add Thurman here, because he trusted and preached about the inner authority, which Holmes also built upon. And together they were all saying, don't bypass the struggle. Don't avoid it. Stay conscious with it. Walk the edge of life, conscious of what it is that's keeping you on the edge and wanting to grow, wanting to burst open, wanting to give life by means of you. It means allowing an inner truth to become your outer expression. This is what the science of mind calls right action. And it's not an action of urgency. It's simply an action of alignment right where you are. Aligning with the spiritual truth, the consciousness, the qualities that you want to experience. When you align yourself to those things, you do exactly what Jesus preached. He preached that we had to remember who we really were. He preached that we needed to love each other. He preached that we needed to love ourselves and love God, and that it all came together. And so, let's make this practical and real. Walking the edge of life today for you might look like staying in a conversation instead of withdrawing or dominating it. Listening without rebuttal. Sending and giving love to those places within ourselves that might feel ouchy and tender. Setting a boundary without anger or contempt. Choosing curiosity when judgment would feel safer. These are not small acts, my friends. These are spiritual maturity lived out loud by each of us. And they require us to have a trust and a faith in something larger than ourselves. They require us to have a faith in the creative process, in spirit, in the universal law, in God, in Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it. We need to have a trust and a faith in something larger than us. If I'm going into the arena on my own, I've lost as soon as I cross that threshold. But when I know that I'm going into the arena buoyed by my faith and my understanding of truth and principle that is walking beside me, in me, as me, and by me, anything's possible. And everything is possible. And if we were to give a contemporary name to what Jesus embodied and what Thurman articulated and what Holmes explained, we might call that being a modern-day mystic. Not someone who escapes the world and its troubles, but someone who stays rooted in spirit and within it. Staying rooted, awake, and available. So next week, we're going to explore what it looks like to be a modern-day mystic in the world and live this philosophy as a practice. But for this week, the invitation is pretty simple. When the world feels overwhelming, when you notice yourself hardening or withdrawing, pause and ask yourself a couple of simple questions, and ask them gently. What am I protecting right now? What part of me feels unsafe? And what would it look like to stay present instead of armoring up in this instance? And when we can do that, when we can walk in the footsteps of the mystics that have gone before us, when we can choose to be that modern day mystic and living these principles out loud and expressing them as who we are as individuals, as amazing emanations of the One, well, then we walk in grace, even when we're walking on the edge. Thank you very much. Thank you. And so, my fellow Edgewalkers, let's pray. And so I invite you to close your eyes or lower your gaze. And imagine, if you will, being completely grounded in midair, uncertain of the ground beneath you, and yet feeling completely carried by the one universal, absolute, devoted, creative process I call God. And I know in this moment, as we recognize that the ground may be moving beneath our feet, we are solidly anchored within, remembering who we are, remembering what we've come here to do, remembering how we are empowered to live this thing called life, spiritually, wholly, and completely. And I know for each one that when the world barks its obnoxious bark, when things in our life begin to feel unsteady, that we can pause and we can remember this solid truth that there is a power greater than us, and we can use it. There is a power that is moving through each one of us. It enlightens our mind. It opens our hearts. It allows us to be steady in the face of deep sorrow or tenderness or chaos or beauty, knowing that this is the world that is presenting itself to us to be loved more deeply, more completely, and more wholly. And so I know for each one, we are that place where God shows up. On the streets, in our bedrooms, in our living rooms, in our kitchen tables, in social media even. I know that there is a place for the voice of God, and it wants to use each one's voice. And I'm grateful for all those who are willing to say yes to the call of consciousness as we walk bravely together along this edge, trusting that everything is evolving for the highest good. We simply let this go. We give it to the law. We anchor ourselves in love and truth as we say together, and so it is.